Disclaimer, trigger warning. The We Are One podcast aims to shed light on the abuse experience within the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church. The stories shared are from survivors who bravely recount their personal experiences. It is important to note that unless an abuser has been convicted in a court of law, they are presumed innocent until proven guilty. The podcast does not serve as a legal judgment, but rather is a platform for survivors to share their truth. Welcome to the We Are One podcast. Let's jump right into today's episode. Here's your hosts, Olivia and Jennifer.
Welcome back to the We Are One podcast. I'm your host, Olivia.
I'm your co-host, Jen.
And on today's episode, we are sitting down with our guest, Abby. And in this episode, we are just talking with her about her experience within the IFB and what it was like to go through kind of a scandal, y'all. And you guys are going to have to stay tuned throughout the episode to hear it, how it unfolds, because when Jen and I talked with her on the phone, we had so many questions, and we still do. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
Hey, Abby. Welcome to the We Are One podcast. We're so happy to have you join us today.
Thank you for having me join you. I'm so excited to be a part of this.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked on the phone a couple months ago, I know Jen and I were there were so many questions that we still have. So we're really excited to, hopefully get more answers to a lot of the things that we talked about. So Abby, can you talk about what was life as a young kid? Were you born and raised in the IFB, or how did you guys get into it?
Yeah, so I was born and raised. I grew up in a church. I attended church 3 times a week. Never service missed. It was very, very strict. Even if I was sick, I was sitting in the back of the church with my family. At a young age, I was the youngest of 6 kids. So at a young age, I kind of always felt I knew something was off with where I was in the church in life. I don't know if it was just watching my siblings grow up and find their own ways. I mean, my next oldest brother is about 10 years older than me. So I really had a lot of different views of life at a young age. And an early confusion in my faith kind of started at a really, really young age, growing up in that. But
do you think the confusion came more from family life or from just the church, the youth group? Where did that confusion come from?
I think because I think it was a little bit of both. I have a wonderful family. I have a very, very large family. We're very close-knit with my cousins, my aunts and uncles, and none of them were part of the IFB. My family was the only portion of our whole entire family that was part of this. And I knew that the rest of my family they were Christians. They still believed in God. So I didn't really understand at a young age how, the IFB church would be anybody can get saved. You need to go witness to the world. Anyone can get saved. But then they turn around and be God's going to love you less because your standards are different than what we're teaching. And it's well, if God loves me less, then how can the whole world get saved or become Christians? It just I was very, very confused from a young age on what Bible principles really were, because I wasn't being taught the Bible. I was being taught lies and rules.
Yeah, I mean, I for sure can relate to that because we were the only ones in the IFB, and so when we would go to family events or whatever, granted we were allowed to wear pants. My parents were super laid back because they were not born and raised in the IFB. I think that is a huge factor in how laid back my parents were, but there was just a lot of things I think it was more because the IFB, it's all about image with them, so it's easy to live a secret and double life. And I think it's taught such a young age that you don't even realize that you're keeping secrets or you're doing this or whatever. You're lying because you just care so much about the image. And it's these are your family. You know what I mean? I just remember having that fear of oh, if I tell my aunt or something oh, if we're doing this or whatever. And it wasn't so much that they care or they were judging. It was more of just like, you're so used to living a double life, you don't even realize that, like, it's no more of a double life anymore. Like, it's just like, that's who you are. You become secretive, you become a liar, pretty much. I mean, I can't tell you how many times Jen and I have talked with so many people, and people always say it's so easy to become like a liar in the IFB because
Mhm.
you're so used to protecting yourself, your image. So it's easier to lie and ask for forgiveness than to just be honest and be like, yeah, we're doing this weekend or whatever. And so I for sure can understand that confusion, definitely with you. So because you're, like you said, you and your family were the only ones in the IFB, did that ever put like any like hard feelings with your family if like you guys like missed anything or
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Missing family events, Christmas Eve parties, because we had to go to the Christmas Eve service at church. Or if church was on Christmas Day, we were at church, we were at a Christmas gathering with our family, and just different things like that. Um, and that was the other thing, backing up on what you were saying, the whole double life thing. My family was pretty laid back as far as, our dress code. Like, I was allowed to wear pants at home, I was allowed to do all that stuff, I was allowed to go to the movies. But then the confusion instilled in me at such a young age, because I walk into church and I can't tell anybody I'm doing that stuff. I can't be caught in pants in public. I can't be caught listening to a song that's not out of the hymn book and things like that. So it was very a back and forth lifestyle.
Wow. Yeah, I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, and I'm sure a lot of people listening can as well. Um, so after like your childhood and then into your teen years, was there anything like youth group wise that stood out to you, or did you go to college? Take us from basically your after your childhood up to teenage and college years.
So I left IFB when I was about 17 years old. So um, my whole entire life I spent in that. And by the time I was about 13 years old, entering into youth group, I had like a really I had a loss of the sense of myself. I had no idea who I was. I felt extremely uncomfortable in my own skin. Um, I knew I dressed differently than normal people, um, and there was such a hyper focus in my church on the way you look and the way you dress and the way you put yourself together, that like I started having weight issues as
Mm.
a young teen. I was very, very over focused on my figure. And I mean, I was probably 120 soaking wet as a teenager. So there was no reason for me to be like so hyper focused on my weight. But I mean, by the time I was 15 years old, I was not allowing myself to eat. I put myself on diet pills. I was just, that was a big thing that I remember in my early teenage years, kind of like kicking off. Um,
And do you think, because, we just actually talked about eating disorder with another guest, and, I just like publicly for the first time came out and talked about it, that I struggled. And so I appreciate you bringing it up because I know it's not easy. But do you think that stems from the way that these preachers, the IFB preachers, come about women being a godly woman and like what that means, and like basically, I mean, we've seen some crazy sermons where like, I mean, they're basically calling these women pigs and like, oh, stand in line for a donut, and like I can't even tell you how many times like hearing these sermons or whatever, even as someone who struggles with the eating disorder, I'm just like, man, it's really discouraging to know like a pastor would say that like about women. So do you think it stems from that, or does it stem with just like maybe an activity? Like for me, like when I think about with my eating disorder, it always like when I came to terms like, okay, I need help, and accepted it. And when my doctor was like, do you know possibly where it stems from? If not, like maybe you should kind of figure it out so then you know. And I was like, yeah, it stems back from always thinking that males win, boys win. And I'm one of those like, no, I will prove you wrong. I've always had that attitude. And so it was like, yeah, I can eat 10 to 12 soft tacos at Taco Bell and try to beat a guy. And then once that becomes a habit, because keep in mind, you do these activities at least once a month, even sometimes more, you don't know portion control. And during those times, definitely as a female, those are really important time frame with like hormones and stuff like that. So like eventually you just cling on to either not eating or you're eating too much. And so I'm curious for you, was that stemming from like a pastor or just activity or?
It was a pastor in authority in my church. I was involved in some sports. So the church I attended had a Christian school attached. So I was also involved in sports. And I remember having a coach always say to me, like anytime he saw like me eating or there's probably multiple girls he did it to, but he'd be like, that's going to catch up to you. And just comments like that all the time. And I think that mixed with the focus on your shirt's too tight or your athletic wear isn't covering the bottom of your knees. There's such a focus on your body all the time and your image that I think it just created this false sense of weight reality in my head. And the dress code at my church and school was just, it was bizarre. That like I feel like that was the focus 95% of the time was our dress code.
Yeah. And we hear that every week now, like that a lot of us women, it's like, the dress code. And it really is. It is so, like to men, they're just thinking, oh my gosh, it's just a skirt. It's not that big of a deal, or it's culottes. But like when you grow up in such a high strict religion or aka cult, and this is what you're wearing, that's who you become. And so when you are so worried about, oh my gosh, if my shirt's tight, is this going to make a guy, like you're always thinking of someone else's sin instead of like your own, in the way of like, oh my gosh, if my shirt is see-through, is it like gonna make a man like sin? And it's just like, it's ridiculous that even at a like small or at a young age, that's like where you're thinking. Because like, I mean, they split you up even in like, I like, people are like, no way, but like, kid you not, guys, like 2 and 3-year-olds are not allowed to sit like to each other. It's boy table, boy line,
Yep.
girl line. There's no, so like when you grow up and you're in these environments where it's boys on this side, girls on this side, no cross, no mixed seating or whatever, you know what I mean? Like that's crazy. But then it's like, okay, then once you get a little bit older, like definitely for my former church, it's like, okay, the 5th grade girls to 5th grade boys, like there's no mix,
There's no interaction.
there's
They
no
don't know how to
interaction.
act.
And then when you grow up into it as a teenager and you're going through puberty and you're going through a lot of changes and body changes, and then you have pastors like what your pastor said, I swear, I promise y'all, if my pastor would have said that, or my youth pastor, I would have been like, I'm sorry, what? Say that again. I want you to say it again. No, like that's what the thing is. Like with IFB, they might not call you fat like to your face, or they might not use the word fat, but they will work it around where you're like, oh my gosh, they think I'm fat, or oh my gosh, they don't think I'm worthy of a husband because I have a fat roll. And it's like, okay, and these men are looking like they belong on 600-pound life, but here we are.
Oh, yeah. Preach, girl, preach.
I mean, like, if you look like you're about to stick to the chair instead of getting up to usher, I mean, come on.
I like remember
Amen.
at a certain time, I was about 14 years old, 14, 15 years old. And I remember having like, I think it was either a pastor or the principal of the school literally walk circles around the girls before letting us leave on a field trip to check our whole entire body head to toe out to make sure we were in appropriate enough attire to
And
go
that's
town.
so creepy.
And we were all wearing uniforms. We were all wearing the same exact thing. So it just like what are you doing?
Yeah. Like, do you want a picture? I can take a picture, but whatever. Ugh. people are weird. So do you like when you think about that time frame, did your parents ever like notice like your physical changes or like you're not eating? Like was that ever a topic within your family?
Um, I think my parents noticed me becoming depressed. I went into a pretty dark depression. I had struggled a lot with authority in my school. I was kind of somebody with a strong, outgoing personality. I was in the IFB circle, kind of labeled me as like, oh, she's defiant. She's in her ways. Like she's not going to. She's going to be one of those that isn't going to like morph into exactly what we want her to be. And they were right because I knew from a young age that something wasn't correct. So I think my parents started to notice at around when I was like 15, 16 years old that like I had like a little bit of like a darkness about me that I just I was angry with a lot of people. Um, and I felt like I did portray some anger towards my parents because I felt like they weren't listening to me. I look back now and I know my parents didn't know any better. They didn't know what they were going through. Um, that's how they became Christians, was immediately into the IFB. So I know that they didn't know any better, but that's definitely something that they probably picked up on. My mom will say to this day that she can look back now and be like, "Oh yeah, you were going through it."
When you were going through like a dark area in your teenage years, can you talk about what was life like at the IFB school that you went to? Was it like your church's school or was it just like an IFB school at a different facility?
It was my church's school, which were very, very connected. There was a lot of rules, like if you attended our school, you had to be in church 2 to 3 times a week. Um, I had complete separation of boys and girls. Like you weren't allowed to sit at the tables next to each other. If you were seen talking to a boy, you got pulled aside and spoken to. Um, I felt like the authority of the school was given this control where they were just pretty much allowed to bully us. That's how I felt. Like I felt like I was bullied every day. I would literally walk out of school, going to my car and start crying on my way walking to my car. I know that like at one point I had a teacher who like told me that the only place I was going to end up in life was a prison. Um, he told me I wasn't going to get anywhere in life. Um, I had another one told me that high-fiving a boy was going to lead me to get pregnant in a couple years. Just bizarre. And like I was so confused. Like you don't tell that to a 15 or 16-year-old. That's not like how you educate them on life. And um yeah, that's pretty much kind of the whole like rules of the school. Favoritism was a really big thing. I don't know if you've heard that a lot as well. And
Heard it, we lived it. I mean, the
yeah,
staff member kids at my former church,
yeah,
I mean, still to this day, they get away with a lot. So
yeah. They could get away with pretty much anything. They were the only people that were allowed to have relationships with the opposite sex. They were allowed to get away with dress codes. Like I could be standing next to a staff member and their skirt could be 2 inches shorter than me and I'm the one getting the detention. That type of stuff.
was
I
there
saw
was there any like do you remember at the school was there any like how far did they go with discipline with the dress code? Like did you guys like was there ever like a suspension or like expel like or did they just like make your parents like bring you clothes? Because I've heard like some crazy things.
so there was definitely suspensions, detentions. I kind of I don't think I ever got suspended. I definitely got detentions for it. But there was instances that I remember like towards the probably when I was like 16. So the big thing with us was like culottes. That's what we were allowed to wear as our athletic wear, and they were to cover your knee completely. They weren't allowed to accentuate anything. Like, you pretty much didn't have legs. That's how it looked to me. And they were all homemade. Like, the pastor's wives, like, they would measure you, they would make them. There was a day at school where I was getting dismissed at like 12:30. My mom was picking me up, and I went and I put on a pair of these like massive, I mean, they were like probably just as big as culottes, but they were like, my mom bought them from like the boys section at Walmart. So they were like basketball short material. And I put them on, and I was waiting for my mom to pick me up. And I believe a principal walked up to me, and he was like, you either go put your skirt back on or leave the property and don't come back on it. So just like very, like, where do you want me to go? I'm 15. Yeah. I'll gladly walk off your property, no problem. But just, it was very hyper focused. I did see a lot of, with the favoritism, I saw a lot of girls become quote unquote like friends with pastoral authority and pastoral leadership. And I kind of like, I don't want to say I got jealous. I would say I felt shame and hatred from them while they were getting like favoritism from these pastors. But then like I kind of realized as time went on, I was blessed to not have those friendships, because I truly believe 75% of them were inappropriate. I believe, I mean, I don't think a 40-something-year-old pastor should be going on a run or a workout with a 16-year-old girl. And that's the type of stuff that was going on weekly.
Yeah, can we talk about that for a second? Because you told Jen and I that on the phone, and I kid you not, I think still, if we like look back, I think that was one of the times like after, I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize too, like we do a phone call before we interviewed, not because we don't think somebody's worthy, but we want to be able to make sure we can put you where like our series or whatever like we have planned for the podcast. And so when you said that, me and Jen, that was the first time we were like, wait, what? Like, I'm sorry, what? And you were like, just saying it like it was normal. I'm like, a run?
Yeah.
This is kind of the first I've heard of this, just because I've done it longer than Jen, and I was still flabbergasted. Not because I don't believe this stuff doesn't happen. Obviously, this stuff happens. But when you were saying it, I was like, I need more. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I believe when I was about 14 years old, we accepted an assistant pastor into our church from Hyles-Anderson College.
Oh, shocker. Oh,
there's that name again.
That's pretty much your explanation right there.
Yep. Got it.
Kiss the feet of Jack and all those people all the time. Like, we praised and worshiped those people. But yeah, he was definitely one that was asking the girls to go on workouts, go on runs. I mean, this is a guy with a wife and four sons going on runs and workouts, taking these girls for drives to get coffee. And they're the same age as his sons were.
Oh.
Yeah.
This is where we add the crickets.
Oh, man. Okay. So they were going on runs together because, like, what were they
wearing? I want to know. Were they running in culottes? For the love of God.
They better have been.
Right? Or a jean skirt, guys.
That gives you a really sour.
That's super cringe. Just saying. That's like something my ex would do.
Yep.
Honestly.
Jen gotta throw that in there. Okay, so would go on coffee runs and just runs or whatever. Did his wife know?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, I guess if she
he
didn't
was a very,
know...
very Hyles-Anderson person.
Newsflash, she knows now.
Yeah. Oops.
Newsflash.
Bingo.
Newsflash.
This is where we add bingo theme song in it. Oh, Lord. Oh, he had kids, the same age or whatever. Do you know if like they ever I wonder what the girls told their parents, like, you know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm gonna go on a run with you. if I would have done that, my mom would be like, "I'm sorry, what?"
I think everyone in that church was so manipulated and brainwashed that they didn't think anything of it. I think that's
They're
really
just yeah,
my
they're
dad
vulnerable.
was like, "Absolutely not. If he were to ever ask you, it's an absolutely not." And then I had a youth pastor as well that I was very close to that was pretty protective of me, and he was like, "Don't do it." Um,
Can you okay, so I am curious, how did you guys do youth? Like how many youth pastors did you technically have? Like and like what was the ages together? Because, for me, we had junior high and then high school and then like occasionally we would do like, youth activities together like we're, junior high whatever, but not really. But I'm curious, what was the ages like in yours? Were you guys all together? Do you guys split up
yes.
by grades?
We were 7th grade through 12th grade together. Um, there was a pastor, assistant pastor, then technically a youth pastor, and then there was like a few like youth leader assistants. Um, the assistant pastor, a lot of times I felt like stepped into the youth pastor role just because like I don't know, it was it's all about control. And when like they feel like one person isn't doing enough, like I could tell you right now, like I had a youth leader from like 14 to 16 who like saw through what was going on, and he like saw through the whole IFB movement, and they picked up on him doing that, so they like assistant pastor steps in and kind of pushes him to the side to control what he was doing. So it was definitely all like I think the summer before I left IFB, um we went to a youth camp, and our youth pastor took us, the one that was good, the good one. My dad joined. My dad was a youth leader for a while, up until all this stuff kind of came to light. He wasn't pastoral or like had authority figure. He was more like an assistant. He would help with like activities, stuff is to go to drive them to camp, stuff like that. Um, but then my dad and that youth pastor weren't really like two trusted people because they were starting to figure out like things are not right. So they sent the principal of the school with him, and the principal was the um, founder of the church's son. So like it was all this big control game. In my opinion and many people's opinions, it was
It's very family tied in the
yes.
IFB. I mean, whether it's family tied and just strict staff members only, like that, or it's always like it's very rare to find an IFB church where there's not a family tied. Like it is very family tied. And I think that also allows abuse to happen because you're going to cover for your family.
Yep.
You're going, you know what I mean? So the way that, I mean, honestly, we got to give it to them for creating this system. I mean, the manipulation and the opening the doors for any abuse. I mean, the system is pretty much set up for that. And the only way it will ever change is if the system changes, and I don't ever see that happening.
And
Um,
that one family is always the group of people that picks the next pastor for the church. That's what I also have noticed. There's not really a church vote or whatever they call it. It's always like it's in their control. If they meet it to their standards, yeah.
how many members would you say? Is it a pretty good size IFB church, or is it small? Or
Now it's next to nothing, I believe. I think they actually ended up joining in with another church, IFB church in the area, and I've heard it's even more extreme than what I witnessed.
oh
But
god,
I know like years ago, back in the early 2000s, I believe the school was pretty thriving. Um, I live in an area where like church is not really a big thing. I'm in New England. Um, so back in the early 2000s, it was a pretty thriving church and school. By the time I was in high school, I think there was like 40 kids in my high school. And now I think their whole entire school from preschool to 12th grade, they have 30 something kids. So it's very like dwindling. It might be even like a homeschool act now. I don't know exactly what they're doing. I'm kind of shut off from a lot of people there, so I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on.
I'm always curious when like we talk with people like really how big is their IFB church or how small it is. And I think that does matter to a certain extent because the bigger the church it is, I think obviously there's a lot of more patterns and stuff like that. And so let's talk about so the principal went to like the camp and stuff like that. Can you talk about how that was? Like what was your experience going to like those type of activities?
So I really enjoyed going to camp. The majority of my teen years, I loved it. I loved being able to go and actually like interact with other kids because I don't know, I felt like I saw a sense of normalcy in other people that I wasn't used to. Like the other churches we mingled with weren't all like super IFB at these camps. There was a camp that we did go to that was strictly IFB only, and it was the most miserable week of my life. I cried myself to sleep every single night. Um,
Can you say what camp it was? What camp did you go to?
oh, it was one in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
It was run by the Clark family. At that time, they had rented out a campsite.
Are we talking about the same Clark family that they list like the singers?
Yeah,
That like Travis and all of them?
yeah.
I have been waiting for this moment for them to get brought up because my whole former church, like, kid you not, I know word for word all their music because that's
Yep.
okay. Okay. I've been waiting for this moment and here we are.
So I attended one of their camps. That was bizarre. That was like before we left for that camp, every single one of the girls had to be measured head to toe, and have custom made culottes. Once again, a very like Hiles Anderson camp, I would say. Um, it was a pretty poor experience for me. It was a lot of the scare tactics being thrown out. Like I remember um, one sermon at night, it went till like 10:30, 10:45, and like being told that I was going to burn in hell because I didn't do something a certain way. Um, that was a lot of the experience I had at those camps. It was lots of scare tactic preaching that I left terrified of. Um, the final camp that I went to as a teenager with the church I was involved in, it's like a kind of it's harder for me to talk about because I think a lot of these people realize now what was going on was wrong. But so I went with my youth pastor, my dad, and then our principal took us down to this camp. And the principal picked out the chaperones for the week, and they all happened to be girls that were the favorites and about like 3 years older than what I was at the time. So I'm 16 years old with a 19-year-old chaperone. Make it make sense. Told specifically to keep an extra eye on me just because like I think my dad had started to speak up about a lot of things, and they knew like my personality was like not for what a lot of their rules was. um I would say this is when my parents' eyes were opened up pretty much completely. It was after this camp that they pulled me out of the school and didn't send me there for my final year of high school. But I was attending this camp, and the girls were allowed to take my phone at night. These 19-year-olds allowed to take my phone at night. They told the principal that I was sneaking out in the middle of the night and meeting up with guys in the woods, which, like, I didn't leave their room. I never left the building. But I would sit with these two boys from a church out in Ohio during services, and they claimed that I was having an inappropriate relationship with these boys, not knowing that these boys were literally family members of mine. So I went through this, like, they took my phone away from me that night. I turned around, stole one of their phones from them, and locked myself in the bathroom and called my dad and told him everything that was going on. And my dad, my sister lived in the area of this camp, happened to just be 15 minutes away. My dad came, picked me up at the campsite with my suitcase and luggage, and pulled me out of the camp. For the rest of the week, he said, you can be a solo camper, or you can join another church, or you can hang out with your sister for the rest of the week, but, like, you're not going through this anymore. Like, this is ridiculous. So that's what we did. And then on the way home, we of course all had to drive together back to our state. The principal requested for me to be sitting in his van and bus on the way home. My dad's like, no, I'm gonna have my daughter with me. Like, that's the weird, like, just very targeted behavior towards
Not
me.
like by yourself, right? Like
No,
it
but
would
he
be
just, like,
other
he
people.
wanted
Okay.
to oversee. So at that point, my parents pulled me out of the church and school.
And did you just
Now,
do homeschooling, or?
I attended another Christian school in the area that wasn't IFB.
And would you say that's when you and your family left the IFB, or what was the process after that?
So I began at the new school in September, and my parents, I think, left the church middle of October, mainly because, like, we were pretty much being treated like criminals, that I was going to a different school at that point. And then my parents didn't return to a Baptist church. Like, my principal's son, I grew up with him. He was my best friend. I mean, like, I have
okay.
baby pictures with him. There was a girl in the school around 10th, 11th grade that had, like, a major infatuation with my best friend, or my friend at the time. And he and her started kind of dating, and dating was, like, a big no-no. Like, I was not allowed to have the boyfriend that I secretly had at the time, obviously. But this was, like, completely allowed, pretty much. Like, everything was allowed. However, she began this huge, like, hatred towards me because of how close I was with him. She shoved me up against a wall in the bathroom of our school, just blaming me that their relationship wasn't going to work out. There was one point where they forced me and her to sit down and talk everything out, because my dad had gotten involved at that point and said, like, you're allowing this girl to bully my daughter for something that you're not even allowing my daughter to do. And they sat us down, left us alone, went into their office. So we're sitting in the gym, and this girl picks up a chair and chucks it at me. And right when that happened, my youth pastor happened to walk out of one of the offices and see it. And he walked in and said to the principal, he's like, this girl is a snake. Like, you don't realize, like, what you're allowing in the treatment, like, that's being caused to other people in the school. So that was also my last year at that school too. That was, yeah.
So,
was
I
kind of,
mean, basically, the way we like can look at it is that clearly there was a target on your back
yeah,
because, and it started even, before the camp, before the other issues that went on. It started back, and it sounds like jealousy or something. Like it's like it really is, and to know like grown men were acting that way, like that's just insane. And also like shame on them for not even disciplining the girl or any of that. It was strictly like it's your fault. And it's just like, and I understand that pain because there was times where I simply I was doing the right thing, but it was just like because I already had that label as the
mhm,
person who talks back, the girl who gets triggered or whatever, sensitive, whatever you want to say. It's like I immediately had that label on myself. So no matter, even if I was doing the right thing or was in the right, it didn't matter
exactly.
because it was just who I am, what my name is. And that's how I feel still to this day. There is people out there who know me that who thinks they know me and they just cast a judgment, definitely with this podcast. And I'm like, it's giving you have not heard one episode. Like it's giving ignorance and ignorance
Yeah.
for itself. And so I totally understand that pain and of like you're just like, okay, why do I have this target? Like what the heck? And then it gets to you mentally like, well, what if I would have done this? Or what if I would have done this? And it's like it doesn't matter.
It led me into years and years of like the darkest depression, and I had the most insane anxiety, panic attacks, and like I wasn't even in this church anymore, but just like all the time. Like I couldn't function as a normal person anymore because I just felt like no matter where I went, work, the store, I felt like somebody was always had a target on my back. There was always something to say about me.
Yeah.
Um, it took a lot to get out of. I mean, we can touch on that in a little bit, but I know that there's other things that
Yeah, for sure. So you moved to a different school. Your parents never went back to a Baptist church. What kind of things did you get into at like the new school? Was it still a Christian school or like what kind of school was it again? And how was it there?
so it was a Christian school. The church that ran it was it was a Baptist church. I don't know if I don't know if they're considered Baptist anymore, but they weren't part of the IFB group whatsoever. I was for the first time ever allowed to wear pants to school. Um, didn't have to wear culottes. I'm pretty sure I burned my culottes in a fire, to be honest.
Hey, I mean, I know a lot of people from my former church are like in their 30s, and I always laughed, even though like when I was still a member of Lighthouse, like when people like older people that I know would make comments like, "Yeah, I had a bonfire that night or whatever," and like still to this day, I love it. I think it's so funny. I just donated them because I was like, "Look, I'm never gonna wear them. You can give them to girls or like girls who don't have them for camp or like." If or like girls who I don't know, like just extra ones for camp, basically. Like, here you go. I don't want them. And I gave them all. Like, kid you not. I bet people from Lighthouse, if you go in that attic or bucket in the youth
They
group,
still have your
they
culottes.
still got them, and my initials are on them, and that tag.
So attending this new school, my parents kind of went in and spoke to the principal of the school and kind of told them the background that I was coming from. And the school also like knew the background I was coming from because it was a school in our league that we played sports against. So they kind of knew I was coming from a pretty bizarre place transitioning over to them. Um, and I overall really enjoyed it there. Like I don't really have any complaints. They don't they weren't crazy. I'll put it that way. They literally weren't crazy. I definitely did always feel like I had a target on my back, but that was me. I realized like that was 100% me. I was so manipulated and anxious about every single move I made. Um, so I started attending that school. I was 16 at that time, when I started my senior year. And that's where some interesting things began happening.
I'm gonna just let you talk about what happened and kind of walk us through the whole process.
So this began when I was 16 years old. It was the year of 2015. And it didn't come to light to me on who this person was until the year of 2021 going into 2022. At the age of 16, I started receiving emails, photos, videos from random accounts. But to start at the beginning, there was an account on Instagram that reached out to me as a pastor's daughter. She was a pastor's daughter that had just moved into the area and was looking for a youth group to attend. And she kind of just started shooting the breeze. She would send a message every couple of days.
And did you, and like you didn't know this girl, it was kind of like a catfish situation. You were just trusting that it was just this girl reaching out basically, right?
And this person also reached out to like 3 or 4 other people that I knew. So we were all kind of like, is this a catfish? Is this actually a girl? Like she's all trying to start conversations with us and she's asking to go to youth group with us, that type of thing. Turned out to be like, I figured it out within like maybe 2 years that it was a catfish, but it was like she was constantly sending me messages, and over time they became like sexual. Like she would ask like things about having a sex life, or like, what was your interest? Are you interested in girls or boys? Like that type of thing. Just like really odd questions to the point like I just stopped answering. And then it came to a point where I was like, you aren't who you're saying you are. Like I could clearly tell. I think I Google image searched one of the photos on this girl's profile and it came up as someone else. So like that's kind of how like I figured out this person isn't who they're saying they are. And I blocked that account, and immediately another account was made. And another account. And another account. And it was just
with different names, or was it the same person?
different names.
Okay.
Yeah, different names most of the time. Some of them were like the beginning of my friend's first name and another person's last name. So like it was like very odd. It was like, who is this person? And by the time I was out of high school, I was in a relationship with someone, and I was still getting all of these messages from these accounts. And I was like, looked at my boyfriend at the time. I was like, is this one of your friends? Like, I don't know who this is. Like, is one of your friends stalking me? Like, you guys are a bunch of teenage boys. You've all gone through puberty. You're all going through Christian school. You're trying to figure out what you are. Like, is this one of your friends? And I literally, like, I remember him calling a couple of his friends and be like, who is this any of you guys? Because like these accounts knew stuff about me and my friends that like you would have to personally know me to know, like where my dad worked, where I grew up, all this stuff. And this went on for like many, many years. I would say up until 2020, 2021, I was still getting things, emails, all different types of things. At one point in like 2019, I think I did a deep search on Google and just started like entering words like onto Google with my name, my friend's name, and links to porn sites started popping up. And there obviously wasn't any pictures of us or anything, but like I noticed a good amount of my information was listed on these like black web websites. And they would like create scenarios of these stories of me and my friends. They were just like, they would make up these stories in their own like fantasy world about us. So really just like blocked a ton of those accounts. Up until about 2021, I was still getting stuff, except to turn to pictures and videos. I would get a video of one of my Instagram pictures on a tablet. It would be literally a video of my face on a tablet and somebody masturbating off to my picture. And that would just keep happening. Multiple accounts, multiple accounts. And I just keep
Oh
blocking
my
them. And I was just like, I didn't tell anyone about this person other than my friends in my early teenage years because, like, again, I thought as an IFB kid, I was doing something like, oh, maybe like my Instagram pictures are inappropriate. They weren't. They were pictures of me and my nieces and nephews. Like the fact that I had somebody masturbating off to me standing in a cornfield with a friend or a kid, like it wasn't adding up. So I would just keep blocking these accounts. In 2021, I received a call from Homeland Security asking me to come into their office for a meeting. And I'm like, okay, like, what does Homeland Security want to do with me? Like, I was beyond confused. And I walked into their office and they started talking about and listing out all of these accounts that had been messaging me for the last 4 to 5 years. And they were like, do you still have any of the, is there any way like you can show us on your phone these messages? And I was able to pull up a few. I think I had just blocked so many accounts that the person doing this was like deleting the account, making a new one. Because I mean, I don't think you can have 50,000 emails to create a new account. I think he was just deleting counts, remaking one. So I was able to show them some messages. And they pretty much told me, like, we think we know who this person is. We can't tell you yet, but you'll be hearing from us again soon. And I ended up going back in for a second meeting with them. And that second meeting is when I found out it was IFB pastor.
Former pastor Stephen Bates arrested Tuesday and charged with possession of child sexual abuse images
In the area that was affiliated with a church about a town or two over from the church I grew up in. I'm pretty sure like we had a lot of programs, recitals, and stuff with that church. So that's kind of how this pastor knew me. And he was also the pastor of one of my friends. But they told me that this pastor had been stalking me for the past 5 years. My information, along with other people's information, was leaked onto sex trafficking websites. So the black web was covered with all of my information, where I lived, everywhere, where I went to school, where I worked, absolutely everything you could possibly imagine. Homeland Security was able to take that stuff down, thankfully. And they were talking about that there was a massive investigation going on with this pastor. And they believed a lot of it had started with me and a couple of other girls. That's where they originally found some of the inappropriate files. He got arrested. His name was Stephen Bates. He got arrested in October 2023, I believe, is when they finally announced his sentence. It was last year sometime. And he was arrested and he's in prison for about 15 to 20 years for child pornography. They found multiple counts on his church computer in his church office. You can literally go online and you can literally see court papers of exactly what videos they were doing, everything. And this was boys, girls, everything, like all children of all ages, down to infants. And it's probably it's disgusting.
I'm assuming he was married. Did
He
he
was
have children?
married, and he had 3 daughters. He has 3 daughters. My age, probably. My age or younger.
Wow.
I'm like
That's a
speechless.
lot. That's a
That
lot to
is,
digest.
yeah, I'm
But I
speechless.
will say that, like, we've talked about this before on other episodes. Pornography is literally a cancer in the IFB. Like, my ex was the youth pastor, and I spoke about this before. He was the youth pastor of my dad's church when we were first married, and I caught him with teenage porn. Now,
Yeah.
there's also been other allegations of child porn that came out. There has also been um, uh, somebody reported to me that used to work at one of his other churches that he worked at one point, that he was looking at pornography on the church computer as well. Guys, this is an epidemic within the IFB. The whole porn thing and the preying on minors and innocent children and women and even boys. I mean, it literally is disgusting. I can't imagine, like, what your parents' reaction to all this was. Like, can you go into that a little bit? Just be like, as a parent myself, I know my struggles with having to share custody with somebody I always looked at as a child predator as well. That was a very difficult thing. And I kind of look at it from that lens. So when you're talking about all this, I'm like, what were her parents doing? Like, did her dad want to murder this guy? Like, I would want to strangle his neck. Like, that's like where my mind goes. Like, I'm like, I want to defend my kids. So what were your parents' reaction to all of it?
My parents were obviously pretty upset, very upset. My dad, way before this all even came to light, took a lot of blame on himself for like the things that I went through, for being such like a depressed teenager, for having so much anxiety. My dad, I feel like, for a while put a lot of that blame on himself because he felt like, oh, I put my daughter through this church and school, so it's my fault. My daughter went through this stuff. It's my fault. My daughter suffers from depression. Um, and so when he found this out, I think like he was definitely angry. We were all very upset, but I think it almost like solidified like where we were was like in so much of a like there was nothing healthy about where we were. Here they are, like they're preaching at you for your self-image. They're telling you to be this way. Um, they're telling you that in order to have a relationship with God, you have to walk a certain way, be a certain way, sing a certain way. Yet in the background, there was a pastor literally preying upon me and friends, and obviously multiple children across the country. Who knows? I know some of the victims spoke out in some of the articles that I sent you, but I think like my parents were obviously very hurt, but they were very thankful that like they pulled me out as soon as they did, because who knows how much worse it could have gotten. um I think that they're heartbroken. I know that they lost a lot of friends, but I think overall they're very thankful to be out of that. um I don't put any blame on my parents whatsoever. They supported me throughout this whole entire process, from the moment I started struggling with depression. I was about 18 years old. I dated someone for about 3 to 4 years. And I was pretty depressed coming out of high school, but during that time I fell into like a pretty deep depression, even more so because the guy that I was dating was a lot like what I had dealt with in the IFB church, tore me apart about how I dressed, working out. My mom ended up sending me to therapy. And she actually sent me to therapy with a Baptist pastor. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I was against it 100%. And, there was a point when I was like 19 years old, I didn't leave my bedroom for about 2.5 weeks. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go. I'm going to go to a therapy appointment with this guy. He ended up absolutely changing my life. I mean, he wasn't an IFB pastor. He completely changed my life, broke down everything I went through with the IFB church, and was like, this isn't your fault. Like, you've put your blame on yourself all of these years, and like what you've gone through is not your fault. I became an extremely insane people pleaser, from what I went through my whole entire life. I allowed men in my relationships to walk all over me. I just wanted to feel good. I wanted to feel appreciated because I don't think I ever felt that from authority or people around me in my childhood. I kind of felt always targeted. In 2020, I was sexually assaulted. And I think after that was when like something switched in me where I was like, I need to start standing up for myself. I need to like figure out why the past 21 years of my life I've just been like walked over. I started to go back to church around that time, but I really struggled to find a church that I felt safe in. I would go into a church and I'd be like, this is going to be exactly like what I remember growing up. I was like, and it just was, I'd go for one service and then I wouldn't go back to another church for a couple months. And I went to a church for a little bit, but I felt like the same control factor. I felt like I wasn't learning anything. I felt like it was all about appearance, and I just wanted so badly to get away from that, because like I wanted deep down to forgive the people in my past for what they did to me, because I truly believe like a lot of the people in my childhood didn't know, like they were raised like that. I don't think a lot of them know what they're doing.
Right.
I think, no, as far as a guy doing child pornography, he knows what he's doing. I'm not giving him excuses whatsoever, but I mean like the IFB church, I think they're all so brainwashed that it's this cycle. They're so stuck in themselves. Like they're literally creating rules in a religion that shouldn't exist. And it's not Christianity to them. It's worshiping the church and it's worshiping the pastor. So I think I ended up realizing through my therapy that like just because those people had different standards that they wanted me to live life by, God loved me just the way I was. He didn't care if I held up to their crazy standards of not wearing pants, of being a certain weight. I'm still a recipient of his grace. And I think like I didn't really find a church I was comfortable in until I started dating my husband, actually, which was like 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. I've been part of a church now for the last 2.5 years, and it's the first church I have ever been able to walk into and take a deep breath and know like I'm safe here. I can be who I am. I know that the people around me have their eyes on one thing, and that's just loving each other and having a love for God. And I think the biggest thing is I learned that God was never waiting for me to mess up or to punish me like my church taught me my whole entire life. He was waiting for me to just give it to him and let it go. And that's just like something that took me 21, 22 years of being in this cult to literally realize, faith should never be a performance. And that's what these people act like.
Yeah, I mean, and I really appreciate, you opening up about that, because I know it's not easy, and I know it's hard, definitely, when you've been programmed your whole entire life that this is what God is like, this is what God thinks of you, this is what God's teachings are like. It's very hard to get out of that bubble, because, like, I mean, I can't tell you how many times, even walking in my church, I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm doing the wrong thing because I'm wearing holy jeans. And I'm like, Olivia, get out of your head. It's so far from the truth. And I know so many people personally, if they knew, like, I have always said, like, the grass is green on the other side, but, and I know it's easier said than done, but I feel like I know so many, like, people personally, like, if they really could just listen to all of the people that Jen and I talked to, and I mean, just hear all of these people like you, and knowing that the grass is really green on their side, I really have hope that they will leave the IFB. And I know what it's like to, and you guys do too, like losing everything, losing the people, losing the friendships, losing all of it. But in the long run, like, those people, if they're meant to be in your life, God will prove that to you. And it's a hard and brutal thing to go through, definitely. Like, um
The abuse is not worth it. It's not.
it's
Like,
not, it's really not. And like,
and the years of feeling so flawed and unacceptable that even follow after you leave that abuse,
yeah.
you wish, like, I wish I could rescue people from having
Oh
that
yeah,
experience.
I honestly wish, like, me and Jen could just like go to like people we know and just kind of like kidnap them for a week and be like, look, the grass is green on their other side, type of thing.
Right.
Fair warning, we're not going to kidnap nobody, but the thing is, like, we wish that, like, I know for a fact there's like 5 people that comes to my mind that if they called and said, I want resources, you best believe I will be at their front door with resources for them to get out. Whether that means because they're leaving abusive marriage, they're leaving their mother, they're leaving their father, they're taking that next leap of independence and trying to figure out what they want in life, and kind of having that open critical thinking that, like, you were programmed not to have. I know for a fact that, like, we would. And that's what a lot of people either realize or don't realize is, like, Jen and I really do feel called to do this podcast and speak with people just to one, whether someone is out there in the IFB and whether they leave or not, they know, listening to this, that they're not alone. Because I promise you, I know a lot of people probably have considered emailing us or commenting or whatever, but they can't because, oh, someone's going to see my comment, or someone's going to see that, or like the idea of it, like, coming out to light or whatever. That would never happen. Like, Jen and I would, I mean, we do anything to make our guests on here comfortable, whether that's hide your identity. I mean, we've already had that, where we're like, just come on and share your story, because if we can help one person out there feel less alone, then, like, it's worth it. We don't do it for views, we don't do it for money. Like, we just truly are out here wanting people to come on and share their stories and their experience, so it can help someone who is trapped in the IFB because they don't think the grass is greener on their side, or they don't think that they can do it. And, like, I promise you,
You can do it.
You can do it. You can do it. It's hard. It's super hard, but there is a huge community out here. Ex fundies, there really is a huge movement going on with the ex fundee. And there's so many people out there that, like, again, I would have never thought I would meet or like be able to relate, because there's a huge age gap, but like it really is a huge community. And so um we thank you so much for coming on and, talking about your experience and sharing these hard things and hard topics. I mean, we kind of covered a big variety, eating disorder, spiritual abuse, physical abuse. You opened up about being, sexually assaulted, and then also pretty much having Homeland Security call you up and tell you like, hey, you are on the dark web, like your address, your identity, everything. I cannot imagine that. I honestly, if Homeland Security, I'd be like, okay, thanks for the prank, bye, like not coming in. Like, no joke. I would be the one who would get rated on national television. I'd be like, oh, I thought it was a scam. Like, I'd be the one to go viral over that.
Yeah, I got that phone call and like I told no one. I was like, I'm gonna go to the office, figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
If I'm
Yeah.
in trouble.
Yeah. Well, yeah, again, we thank you so much for, reaching out to us and wanting to speak on our episode today. We really appreciate talking with you, Abby, and we are looking forward to hearing the feedback. Hopefully, as time goes on and this comes public and stuff like that, people can learn more about who you are, and maybe someone from your former church will reach out, or school, and be like, hey, I was a jerk back then, or like, hey, I didn't know, or whatever, and it can rekindle a friendship or something for you. So thank you so much for speaking on today's episode.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Abby.